Thanks for coming. I know it's getting close to the end of the week, so we really appreciate you coming and spending some time with us. I'm Kevin Wallenweber, and I lead our data center and internet infrastructure organization. And so I know that's not a very descriptive term. It's basically all the infra that we use to build out traditional networks, AI networks, and sort of everything in between. What we want to talk about today, though, is not necessarily the specifics of the AI workloads themselves, but really what we see coming over the next couple years and what impact we think it's going to have to the networks and to the infrastructure that you're building. Before I jump in though, one interesting story for me is, as I was flying down, I was watching a show on the airplane called The Thinking Game. I don't know if anybody's seen it, but it basically talks about DeepMind and what they were able to do from taking a model 15 years ago and training it to play games and strategic games like Go, to beating chess champions with the IBM infrastructure. And then it ends with what they did around taking amino acid chains and figuring out how to fold them into proteins. What's amazing to me is the innovations that we're driving and the pace of innovation that we're seeing with AI and the impact that it's going to have to society and to the world. And so for me, it's no longer about, are we going to see AI? Is AI going to be able to drive our ROI? And are we going to see a lot of these applications in our network infrastructure? But it's really about how fast and what this is going to look like over the next couple years. So if we look at most of the spend that we've seen on infrastructure for the last few years, it's really been around large language models and the hyperscalers and the model builders. We've seen billions and billions of dollars and completely new network infrastructures built around building up, scaling GPUs so that we can train these large foundational models. It's a very small number of very large, well-capitalized companies. What's really interesting and what we're starting to see now, though, is this first wave of agentic applications. And so when you think about the early days of ChatGPT, which realistically was only about 3 years ago when we really saw it burst onto the scene, a lot of it was around queries and quick questions that we were asking to the models, tokens passed to the models, quick processing, and then tokens passed back. These agentic workflows are going to be a lot more around intelligent models, reasoning, getting data back, asking themselves questions, and leveraging more and more of that network infrastructure. And so we're still at the very, very early days of what impact that's going to have to our networks. But what I think is really interesting is if you start to look even further out, today we're still focused on models and models that are living inside of the data center and inside these centralized parts of your network. If you listen to what Elon Musk talks about, if you look at where robotics and self-driving cars and all these other technologies are going, eventually AI is going to move outside of the walls of the data center. And so there we have to start to think about, I think Jeff talked about it in the keynote, if you saw the keynote, we're going to go from 8 billion people in the world that are potentially accessing resources on the network to everyone having tens of agents, and that 8 billion people is going to feel like 80 billion. And there, a lot of the constructs that we've built in networking, the way we process data, the way we do identity and security and policy, all of these things are going to have to change. And so what we wanted to talk a little bit about is, what are some of the things that we see and what are some of the things that we're doing internally to Cisco to prepare you and prepare your networks for this change. So this is the slide that Jeff showed. This is what a traditional sort of chatbot interface sort of looks like. You ask it questions, we send tokens, it responds with answers, and it's very bursty. But if you start to look at things like deep research, if anybody's used deep research, you can send tons of information, tons of documents to the models and say, analyze this for me, and it'll come back in minutes, in hours, and even in days in some instances. And so that's going to have a lot of individual agents processing, talking to different data sources in the network, and really utilizing the network in different ways. And so what we potentially see in the future is, instead of these spiky query response, we see a lot more sustained use of your network resources. You may also have agents that are accessing things that aren't local data within your own property, and so we might have to use the WAN and pull data from other sources. And so we want to start to think about, how should we be building networks today to prepare for this eventual future of agentic applications and new types of infrastructure we're going to need inside of your networks. So let's think about a few things. One, we're going to see a surge of AI workloads. Today, it's still fairly nascent. I'm assuming everybody in this room, knowing it's a very technical audience, everybody here uses AI tools in some way, shape, or form. We're doing a lot more AI coding inside of Cisco. I don't know if you're seeing a lot of that inside of your companies, but they're still nascent applications. And so as these start to grow, we're going to see a surge of these AI workloads. If anybody tells you exactly what this is going to look like in your network, they're lying. We don't know exactly what the impacts are going to be, but what we do know is more traffic, more workloads, and more utilization of the network infrastructure. Second, we see a very different reality of how we want to operate these networks. So think about the example I gave you before. We have some number of people, say 8 billion people in the world, they're all using their traditional applications. In the future, you're going to have 10, 20, 30 agents that are operating on your behalf. They're going to have your credentials. They're going to be accessing different data sources in the network. So we have to think about security and policy enforcement in very different ways from the way we do things today. And then the last thing is, we don't know where all the data is going to reside in the network itself. So today, all of the traditional foundational models are trained on basically every public piece of information in the internet. The crazy thing is, inside of your enterprises, the combined set of data across all of enterprise is larger than all of the public data on the internet. And so as we start to see more and more companies taking their data, fine-tuning models, and building models to have greater efficacy on their own problems they're trying to solve, we're going to see a need to move the models closer and closer to the data sources themselves. And so thinking about the core, the edge, the access, and all of the different aspects of the network is something that we're very focused on. So this is one area where Cisco feels like we can actually partner with a lot of you as customers, is how do we look at not just the data center and the secure AI factories that we're building to deliver tokens, but looking across the core, the edge, the metro, the access, and bringing all these things together as a common system. So when I think about this in 4 main pillars. The first one is, we want to make these things simple and easy for customers to deploy. So we want to think about the network as a platform. We're still using networking, we're still using compute, we still have storage, but in the world of AI, all of these different parts of the network and all these different technology components have to work much, much better as a single system. And so think about things like building up full stack infrastructure, partnering with the ecosystem, bringing in partners like NVIDIA so that we can bring the pieces that we do well, the networking, the security, observability, but then leverage GPUs from other vendors, leverage things like NVIDIA's software stacks that sit on top to run workloads, and then build these into common, simple to consume technology stacks that you can deploy either on-prem or within neoclouds or private cloud providers. Security is going to become critical. Murli's going to come up in a second and talk to you about security. But really our focus as Cisco is, take all the building blocks we have, take all the investments we've made across software, across systems, across optics and silicon, and bring them together in ways that we might not have in the past. So when we think about AI, the network is a critical component. We wouldn't have AI without the network. So I'd like to invite my friend Murli Gondaluru up. He leads our data center business, and he's going to talk a little about some of the stuff we're doing in the data center space. So Murli, come on up. There you are.
Thank you, Kevin. What I'll be talking about in the next few minutes is about how the network fabric is evolving for the AI era. And Kevin, you just talked about how operating from the first principles, starting with silicon, systems around that, the software that we build on top of that, and then the optics and the operating model. That's very key because AI networking is not just about pipes anymore. It's not just about the speeds and feeds. There's many aspects of networking that has to be rethought, also about network infrastructure. So we have to think about how we can provide predictive, low latency, low jitter across multitudes of networks. And I'll touch into that a little bit here. When we think about a network, traditionally we've thought about it as, we never used to think about it as a front end. You just had a network. You had a network that had storage attached to it and then maybe an out-of-band management network. But the back end now has become so prominent and ever more so going forward, that we have to look at this as a whole across these environments. And the key thing is that we are seeing from some of our customers, especially as enterprises start coming into the fore, we've seen that the front end, the storage also play a part in the AI application paradigm. For example, some of our large social media customers are deploying our fabrics, and certain autonomous vehicle companies, they're looking at prefetching storage files from the storage network. So it traverses across the front end and then brings it to the back end, and then you run your job. Then you've got to do some checkpointing afterwards as well. So there is interdependency on this. So one of the key things we've been doing, thinking about, and this is not the first time, like you pointed, virtualization, we were here to provide a common paradigm. Then we provided that with cloud computing. With this era of disruption, what we're saying and we're doing is we're bringing the same complete 360 degrees thought process from first principles. And so with that, essentially what we want to do is we want to provide the same operational model that provides not just the management, but also the visibility of various elements into it. So if you think about it, we have a lot more east-west traffic. We have all those elements that you see here that expands into this new paradigm with the backend. In such an environment, essentially what we have to remember is that Cisco has purpose-built its infrastructure for this era. And that includes all of the elements we just talked about, including at the data plane, control plane, and on the management plane, particularly in the management plane, because it's a very complex network.
Yeah, so customers have built large networks before, they have existing infrastructure, they wanted to play AI, but they don't necessarily want to rebuild everything in a fabric, use new tools, have new observability, and so they want to be able to take their brownfield operations and bring AI infrastructure into that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now you can extend, for example, Nexus Dashboard or Nexus Hyperfabric into this environment as well.
Exactly.
And you get the best of both worlds. You get the differentiated silicon capabilities, and at the same time, the common operating paradigm as well. So I want to give just a quick example of that on the innovation part, starting from the silicon all the way up to the operating model, which is Cisco Intelligent Packet Flow essentially is built on top of Silicon One. And Silicon One provides us the ability to be able to differentiate between different kinds of priority workloads or communication paradigms. So you can do simultaneously things like flowlet load balancing, as well as per packet load balancing on the same ingress point. And you can do it in an automated manner with, for example, the quality of service paradigms. And so this is something that our customers really valued. And then bringing that with Nexus Dashboard has been very helpful.
Well, and so if you look at how this has evolved, I think we've seen a change in even how customers are using these networks. And so the ability to have programmable silicon, build an infrastructure, and evolve it as the workloads evolve has been really interesting.
Absolutely. And so with that, I just wanted to quickly talk about and showcase how we are actually talking, I want to demo this for you, and I'll just...
Perfect. How about it?
You want to probably go back one slide there? Yeah. Like to demo this? All right, thank you. So what we have here is the Nexus Dashboard. It's a representation of the view that we were just talking about. Nexus Dashboard, as I said, already manages the front end, the storage, management, and now the backend environment. If you see here, you have this tab here which talks about AI. You already have other kinds of architectures here. So you go there, you click on AI, and then you look at the routed fabric, pick that choice, and then we go. And this is where the example we just talked about, Kevin, where we essentially have the ability to not just do one of the load balancing approaches, but actually you can do mixed mode, which means the default traffic uses the lower cost flowlet load balancing, and the ones that shows 24 to 26 DSCP tags uses per packet load balancing. So you are able to maximize your fabric utilization to provide predictable low latency networks. The second thing I want to point out here is that you can actually visualize all of this with our network here as well. So you can see the different color combinations that shows the different kinds of flows as well. And then if we move forward, that's the day one aspect. We want to look for anomalies. We want to make sure that we know exactly and very quickly we are able to root cause the problems. And with that, if you look here, we are seeing that the back-end part of the network has some anomalies. So let's just dig right in to how and where that problem is. So if you see here, there's two critical jobs, AI jobs, that have some anomalies. And these are the two jobs that you see there. And this allows you to very quickly go to the job that you want to look at in more detail and fine-grained detail. And you see that there's a threshold that has been exceeded. So now, typically, one of the things that I've heard, in fact, even in this conference, I've heard many of our customers say, is that their experience of AI fabrics has a lot of optics failures, cable failures. So to be able to predictably and very quickly root cause the problem, this helps. And so essentially, we are able to very quickly see that this link here has a problem, and that there's also a particular problem here with this part of the GPU connecting into the network. And if you go further down, what we see is that there is a temperature threshold that has been exceeded, a transceiver that's gone bad because of that. And so it's very easy to quickly go and change that without especially if you think about 16,000 GPUs or even more that some of our customers have deployed. And so that is why having this kind of a model, operating model, and a user experience is critical for all kinds of infrastructure. And so with that, Kevin, this kind of highlights, I think, some of the key capabilities of the product. And I think this is how we look at things 360 degrees.
Well, so this is a specific example. Obviously, we were digging into a lot of the details of how this works. But if you go back to the slide, one of the things that we're really focused on is how do we take what are now very large, complex systems? We talked about a lot of components like front end, like back end, the ability to do load balancing across, identify problems and failures in GPUs. But if you think about this as a system, there's a lot of work that goes into troubleshooting and diagnosis across a large system like this. And so we're trying to simplify how this works with tools like Hyperfabric so that we can actually enable you to deploy this infrastructure at a much faster pace. But beyond just the building up of these fabrics, we also need to think about security. And so I gave you the example of, if we have 80 billion agents running around, a lot of them have your credentials, they're operating on your behalf. How do we actually think about these agents as resources and look at policy, look at segmentation, look at enforcement? So why don't you talk a little bit about how we're kind of taking security and fusing it into that network infrastructure?
When we think about security, typically an architectures that's deployed, especially network security, it's typically a centralized model where you have firewalls, all traffic goes to the firewall, or at least the relevant flows go to the centralized firewall, and they have to do so many tasks. Yeah. They've got to do all the way from layer 3 to layer 7, all kinds of segmentation as well as identification, IDS, IPS, all kinds of work. So the idea here is, instead of having a bolt-on strategy, let's infuse security into your network. Yeah. And we do that from the first principles again, which is we've built out these smart switches that essentially have the ability to have services, security services run on them. And so one of the key things is, by putting a DPU on board on the switch, now you don't have to go and trombone your traffic to a separate firewall for all the basic layer 3, layer 4 segmentation stuff. You can get that done inline at the top of rack. We have 2 models that are shipping already. They're all Nexus again. You have a 24-port 100 gig switch that's particular for the zone-based use cases. You have a top of rack that's also now shipping here. A typical top of rack that can operate either as a network-only mode, which is without the DPU being enabled or turned on, or with the DPU turned on as well. And the way we bring all of this together is by having a NetOps flow that manages, Nexus dashboard that manages the switch, and the NetSecOps team personas manage through security cloud control and Hypershield, the DPU services. I just want to make one more point here, is that whether it is Hyperfabric, whether it is Nexus, whether it is the switches, smart switches, we're using Nexus 9K switches. So it's
Yeah.
common operating model across the board.
So that's an example of how you're taking security, taking kind of known security principles today that we used to operate in a traditional way and fusing them into the network. One of the other things that we're hearing about from a lot of customers is securing the devices themselves and nation state attacks and kind of some of the challenges that we'll see in infrastructure in the future. What are we doing in that space?
One of the companies that Cisco acquired is a company called Isovalent. And Isovalent has a number of innovations, including, for example, using extended Berkeley packet filter, eBPF, and also creating a CNI, a container network interface for Kubernetes environments. Now, if you extend that, there is an open source Tetragon software that they released. It had to be made enterprise grade, and that's Live Protect. And Live Protect, essentially, what it does is it allows customers to be able to deal with CVEs and vulnerabilities that are out there in the market that shows up, and it's not necessarily the best time to be able to get a maintenance window and have to upgrade all the time. So Live Protect allows you to mitigate, as you said, protecting and securing the devices, and it can continue to run. So essentially, as it says there, stop the attack, don't stop the network.
So you're basically putting a small firewall or mitigation in front of the device to protect it from this vulnerability. We're pioneering this first inside of Nexus, but the plan is to put this across all Cisco products. And so as you start to think about different mode of operations in this world of AI, the good and the bad of AI is it's going to enable innovation to happen a lot faster, but all of your attackers, all of the potential vulnerabilities are just going to happen that much faster with AI as well. And so we're leveraging AI technologies to actually protect the devices at the same time. And so we couldn't do this without partners. One of the big things that we're also doing is we're working on how do we take AI technologies, bring them together and do them in a simpler way. We announced probably a year and a half ago a partnership with NVIDIA. We've been doing a lot in this space with NVIDIA about building up what we call secure AI factories, allowing these AI factories to get built up and then bringing security in. We layer on technologies from Cisco, we layer on technologies from NVIDIA, but at GTC a couple weeks ago, we just announced some new things, and so why don't you talk a little bit about what some of those new things are?
Yeah, I think one of the really exciting things we've done here is first the partnership and the constructs around the partnership. It's the promise of co-partnering, co-developing, co-innovating with NVIDIA to come out with these solutions, the reference architecture we just talked about. What we announced at GTC essentially was fulfilling the two key parts of that promise. One was, of course, Spectrum X architecture, integrating with Cisco Silicon switch, which is the G200-based switch that you see there, and the cloud reference architecture around it. But also, Cisco builds the same Nexus operating model on top of Spectrum 4, or NVIDIA's Spectrum ASIC. So essentially, the Nexus operating model running on the Spectrum ASIC. So now customers have the flexibility of deploying in the back end, in the front end, and other parts of the network, what they choose and how they choose, with a common operating paradigm again. And all of that with the support of the NCP compliant RA as well.
Yeah, so basically bringing choice. So if you're a Nexus customer today and you want to be able to evolve that Nexus architecture to bring in AI, you can do it either with the existing devices you have and Silicon One and Cisco technologies, or if you're deploying NVIDIA AI factories today, you can actually bring those Spectrum architectures in, but still get operations and management like you would with your Nexus ecosystem using Nexus Dashboard and simplifying the architecture itself.
Absolutely, and it spans across enterprise, cloud, neo cloud, all kinds of scale as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing too, is everybody's at a different phase of deployment. Some want more kind of packaged architectures, some want bits and pieces. When we work with the hyperscalers, they want to buy components and put them together themselves. And so I think one of the big values Cisco brings is we take all those components, we package them together in different ways, and we allow you to consume them in whatever way makes the most sense for you as a customer.
Thank you.
And then to make it simpler, one of the things that we've done is we've tried to kind of build that easy button for deployment. We don't want you to have to think about this with the server and this with the switch and this with security and how do I bring in Live Protect. And so we've built validated designs and we package them together in something we call AI pods. And so you look at what you want to do with that. You want to do training, you want to do inference, you want to do fine tuning, and then based on that and certain t-shirt sizing, we can actually build architectures and deliver those in a simpler way. We talked a lot about networking, and so thank you for coming up, and thank you for the demos. I want to kind of pivot a little bit to the other part of AI, which is compute. We wouldn't have AI without networking. We also wouldn't have AI without compute. And so I want to invite up Danny McGinnis, who leads our compute organization, to talk a little bit about some of the stuff we're doing there. There you go.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, hi everybody, how are you? My name is Danny McGinnis. I look after product management for the compute business here at Cisco. I think before we jump in, Kevin, you did a really good job, I think, setting it up when we were talking about going from LLMs to agentic to physical. And I think the big takeaway there, maybe I'll just add on, is that we're actually watching industries transform right in front of us. So if you think about your retail experience, the automation and the entire customer transformation that's happening when you walk into a retail environment, or the industrial revolution that we're going through on the factory floor, I mean, pretty much every single industry is being transformed or reinvented. And so why it's really important, and you've heard us talk a lot about edge and this kind of like hybrid brain concept here at Cisco Live, is that there's a tremendous amount of data that's being generated at edge. I mean, we've been installing cameras and sensors and IoT devices at pretty much all of the locations I just mentioned for quite some time. But now, with the power of AI, we're actually starting to unleash that data, but we're processing more of it at the edge. We're not backhauling all of it. The reason it hasn't been used is we've kind of been discarding really valuable data.
Bringing AI to the data versus trying to push all the data into centralized resources.
Exactly, exactly. And so I think it's really important for you to get into that mindset of, yeah, of course our data centers are going to continue to grow, but we have to think about that concept of data gravity and making sure that we're processing and analyzing data at the edge. And that's really a big part of what we're focused on here this week. All right, so let me just give you, and like I said, the data center's not going anywhere, so let me just cover really quick a little bit about what we're doing with the compute portfolio. For those of you who are familiar with UCS or UCSX or our compute portfolio, you probably know us because of our blade architecture. That's really what made us famous. We're own over 50% market share in the blade space. This is an area that we've continued to double down in. We believe in a time where power and space and cooling are really more precious than ever, that there's a tremendous amount of cost savings and power savings that you get in this type of an architecture. You'll notice a really cool device down at the bottom. We've actually brought PCIe capabilities into our blade. We can actually power 8 RTX, power and cool, 8 RTX Pro 6000s in this box. There's really nobody else doing that in this space. But then we know a lot of you love rack, and so we've worked really, really hard under Kevin's leadership here for the last couple of years to double down on this portfolio, have pretty much every form factor you could imagine in terms of latest and greatest Intel, latest and greatest AMD. And so our goal here is to make sure that you have choice. We've also been really busy building some of these super high density AI servers. These have been exciting to build. So we've got latest and greatest HGX. We started with the H100, H200. We also now have our B300 box out. And then on the PCIe side, a lot of you probably have heard of the MGX reference architecture, which supports the RTX 6000 Pro and pretty much every other PCIe GPU you could imagine, 2, 4, or 8 slicing. So really giving you a lot of flexibility and a lot of choice inside your data center. We took it one step further. We've redesigned, or actually not redesigned, but designed from the ground up, a purpose-built edge platform. I'm going to spend a couple minutes here talking to you about that, but that's really to suffice those needs I was talking about. All right, so the takeaway I'd ask you to kind of leave with, or to get into the mindset of here, is that the core and the edge are really no longer separate worlds. You have to think about this all as one. And to be successful in this space, you're really going to have to think about workload placement, data gravity, latency, data processing.
AI is not just one application, right? It's not like AI is a thing and it's going to reside in one place. You're going to have training done somewhere, you're going to fine tune in other places, and you're going to inference and run these workloads in other areas. So you're going to need, even within a single customer, different types of compute in different places to perform all these functions.
That's right. And I think you have to be really thoughtful about where you're actually going to process and analyze. If you're going to make a split-second decision based on a checkout experience store, you certainly don't want to backhaul.
Don't send across the country or outside of Australia back to somewhere in the US.
10 milliseconds of latency just to go across the country here in Australia. So, all right. So I introduced to you today, we just launched this last week, so we're about 7 days old on the launch of this, Cisco Unified Edge. You'll hear us say it's not a server, it's a platform. This was really us taking the best of everything we do at Cisco in terms of compute, in terms of networking, in terms of security and storage, and bringing that all together into a single platform.
And a lot of it came directly from feedback from you and feedback from customers. It was, I have all these things deployed, I have servers, I have network, I have storage, but they're all separate devices, separate management. If you saw the keynote and the picture of the closet, it's a mess, and customers are struggling with how to deploy this deep into the edge. And so this is that feedback all converged into one common platform.
I mean, as an industry, we've been really reluctant to want to put more compute at the edge because of everything that you just mentioned. And so I think we recognize that in order to support all of what I just mentioned about data processing and latency at the edge, we really had to transform your ability to manage this at scale in a distributed fashion. You don't have highly skilled technicians sitting out at your branch or your edge location 400 miles from home base.
And we don't want the baristas having to plug cables in and move stuff around in the facility.
We want to avoid that. So the other thing we did, besides just focusing on the infrastructure itself and having a purpose-built box, we also really focused hard on how we operate all of that, as well as making sure that security was fused in at every layer. So I'll go through these little bit here. On the box itself, or on the server itself, I didn't get too technical in here. Hopefully you saw the keynote. We went into a little bit more deep dive, but it's really around compute, networking, storage, and security all coming together as one. So let's just talk real quick physically. So 3RU platform, 18 inches deep, so short depth, 19 inches wide. It could be mounted on a wall, it could be mounted in a rack, we could stand it up as a tower in the store. It's built as a NEBS compliant platform, so it has air filtration. The fans have been tuned to be appealing to the human ear. It's quieter than a refrigerator underneath the desk. Supports up to 5 servers, all with GPUs inside if you feel like you add them. 120 terabytes of storage per node. It's a really, really well purpose-built design.
I mean, some of the cool things I thought, not being a server guy, I'm a networking guy by nature, was even thinking through how these get deployed in remote locations and having the ability to do NFC and use your phone, use the app on your phone and claim devices and send them back for remote management, so that the people on site, if they're not IT professionals, don't have to worry about how to bring up a device itself.
It's a good segue too. So from an operational standpoint, like Kevin's alluding to here, we really worked hard to think about the entire life cycle of managing this at scale. And so Kevin just alluded to day zero. I mean, zero touch provisioning, literally zero touch provisioning. The barista or the general manager should be able to take their smartphone, connect it via NFC to the box, put in their inner site credentials, and allow this to phone home. And so the central administration and central ops teams can start to deploy it. So, and then continue that deployment at scale. So we've come up with this, so I'll back up. Intersight has been, for a long time, our probably biggest differentiator in the compute space in the industry and how we manage servers. And what we're really, really good at is managing thousands and thousands of servers in a handful of locations. But what happens with Edge is you have to get into this concept of fleet management. And so what we did was we enhanced Intersight to get really, really good at managing a handful of devices in thousands of locations. And so we've really added a lot of new features. And so that it gives you the ability to not just do zero touch, but then to think about what it's like to actually deploy a fleet. And so you hear us talk about this concept of blueprinting, where think about I have a store that maybe is a kiosk in a mall versus an independent standalone store. Well, that's going to have a different profile associated. Compute settings are going to change, storage settings are going to change. We allow you to store that as a blueprint. Applications may change, and actually deploy all of that via Intersight. And we've integrated all of the networking capabilities, the OS capabilities. You can manage your firmware, you can manage your drivers, you can manage your application settings, all from there. The other thing that's happening, and I mentioned the transformation that we're seeing across the industries. If you're coming at it from the IT side of the house, there's somebody right now, some of these companies that you see up here and dozens and dozens more in pretty much every industry, that's walking into your lines of business and saying, hey, I have a new application that can unlock the data that's captured from that camera or from those sensors, or some new thing that they can reinvent what the experience you're going to deliver to your customers will look like, or your employees will look like. But at some point, you will be asked to provide more compute at the edge in order to support this, because it's the only way it will run effectively. And so we've worked really hard with a large ecosystem of application providers and made it really simple to make sure that we can keep up and qualify as you start to bring these teams in here.
Well, that was actually the expansion of that device is one of the things I thought was interesting too, because you can start it as a small single server, and then you can grow into whatever composite configuration you need. If you need more compute, you add more CPUs. If you need more storage, you add storage. If you need GPUs, you can add GPUs. So it can take on different personalities depending on what you need in that application.
That's right, and every day these applications are coming up and saying, hey, if you had a GPU, or if you had more storage, there's these additional capabilities we can unlock, and I think that whole pay-as-you-go model, the modular model, is really important. And then lastly, I guess it's worth mentioning is just security has been a really big piece. You'll hear us talk about security. I think one of the biggest changes, you say it all the time, with like G2 coming in, having that chief product officer, we're really thinking more and more about not just compute or networking, but it's like, how are we bringing security? Everything Murley just did, I mean, it's almost ingrained in the way we think.
This is one of the crazy things for me with this AI era is all the building blocks still exist, but they have to work together in a common system, and so you have to start that from the top. So thinking about it organizationally, having a chief product officer, defining strategy across every type of product that we build, and making sure that strategy makes sense. I've been at Cisco for almost 30 years, and we've actually never really had that. We've always had separate business units building different products, and so I think we've thought more about how security layers across networking and how it integrates into compute in the last few years than we have ever in my career.
That's right, and I think even beyond the product, I mean, product's almost a prerequisite at this point. It's what you mentioned about the Secure AI Factory, like how we're not just building the product, but we're also doing all the validation testing and creating CVDs and doing the blueprinting to help all of our customers be able to actually not just take the products, but how to put them together in an organized way.
Exactly.
So anyway, I digress, but from a security standpoint, at the physical layer, we've got physical security on the box, so it can't be tampered with at the location that it sits, so that's always a big problem when you start deploying resources like this from a place where it doesn't have physical security. From an inner-site perspective, one of the things we do really well is once you deploy that blueprint down to your site, we're actually monitoring and making sure that it doesn't drift out of the config. You've created a golden standard for store type A. Well, we're ensuring that that golden standard does not get deviated from. And if it does, we're giving you really simple to comprehend dashboards to let you know that you've drifted from your golden standard. And then we continue to extend that in, so you'll see we have internal networking already in the box, so you never have to have a cable on the front of this box. What's coming in the not too distant future will be a Catalyst blade that can plug right in. So we'll actually take a Catalyst 8300, insert that, and we just change the sheet metal, insert that in the box. Now you get all of your SD-WAN and your firewall and your IDS and IDP built right into the same platform, leveraging all the same power, all the same cooling, the same chassis, so you're not dealing with multiple devices. So we've got all that security. And then if you've heard DJ and the teams talk about what we're doing with AI defense, all of the model security, the application from detection to discovery to remediation across safety and security guidelines, we're actually bringing all that in as well, and Splunk is observing. So we've really worked hard to kind of package this up, make it really simple for you to deploy and manage at scale. All right, I think I'll kind of wrap it up here. So for me, why, right? Why us? Why are we different? So, deep networking, deep compute experience, making sure that we change the operating model for you. We really focus on simplified operations. It's the DNA of everything that Murley, Kevin, myself, and the larger teams think about, is how do we help you manage this stuff at scale? And we put a lot of work and a lot of R&D into that. Multi-layered security, it's inherent in just everything we do. You saw it in all the stuff Murley did, you were just talking about. And then lastly, like what we do, right? We build enterprise infrastructure. So we believe that you're kind of seeing the best of everything we've done at Cisco kind of come into this platform.
I mean, we're early days. So like I led off, I think we're 3 years into the Gen AI kind of innovation cycle. We're early days for how enterprises are going to start to consume technology. And so what you're going to see a lot more from Cisco is how do we make large investments across a very broad portfolio, and how do we bring those together in ways that are simple and easy to consume? So I think the Unified Edge portfolio you talked about is a great one as we see AI move further out to the edge. I think the innovations that Murley talked about that take our silicon investments, our software investments, and new operational models, and try to simplify how you're going to deploy. Those are all ways that we can really take the breadth of Cisco and deliver solutions in different manner that'll make it easier for you to deploy. So, I mean, should be obvious, but I'm really excited about where AI is going to take us. I think some of the examples, like the one I gave you around, solving problems that have been around for 50 years, 100 years in order of days. We're at the infancy of the benefits that we're going to see, and these technology steps are going to get us a lot further along in that journey. So
our journey really to help you do it, to simplify your journey in this space and make it easier for you to actually see time to value and real ROI in your environment. So. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff is demonstrated over at World of Solutions, so please do take the opportunity to walk over there, take a look, and if you have any questions, we'll be around afterwards. But thank you, everybody. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.